Welcome to Psychologist Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Berry, and today we're talking about the Psychologist Talks. So we're going to be talking about the content that I'm creating. And the reason for this video is there's a couple reasons. One is a more formal introduction to me. You will be getting versions and aspects you'll learn about me throughout, I think, a lot of the content. However, I think a more formal, pointed introduction could be in service, and embedded in that a little bit about like what are my goals, like what am I trying to achieve by putting this content out there, and then catty corner to that will bleed into why have I made the content that I made. More specifically, just to give kind of a spoiler alert, is why do I ad lib this one, and number two, why have I chose a long form? And the long form I just want to name real quick. Because if you are checking out this video first and foremost before any of my other videos or content, I will say I know it's longer. I know that what I'm putting out there is longer, and I promise there's an intent to that. And if you want to know the intent, then stick around and figure out that intent. If you don't, then move on. That's totally okay. I get it that if you don't have time or don't want to spend the time, by all means, I understand wanting to move along. So just a little bit of a snapshot. I'll be getting to that later, but I will be addressing choices and why, that there is a reason why I'm choosing to ad-lib these things and do longer form. So again, as far as introductions, Dr. Justin Berry, as I mentioned, I've been in the field for a good amount of time. My path, though, to psychology is not linear. And even the path to how I think about things is not linear. And I want to put that out there because I think it's going to be a big piece of the content today is like, I think we project a lot onto folks these days, especially with social media, that people have these really nice linear trajectories in their lives. And I just don't think that's the case for a lot of people. It was not the case for me. And I want to be really explicit in conveying that I got to where I'm at through a lot of chaos. It was not a nice, neat, linear path. So at the beginning, very much in brief, I'm not going to go into an in-depth life story here, but just understand that, growing up, depression, anxiety was my jam. Body image issues too. I mean, just a lot of stuff going on. What was really interesting though is and we're talking like serious levels, not like I was a little bit down every once in a while, like really heavy stuff, but I wasn't really conscious of it because I defended actively against it. I didn't know how to cope with it. And so in retrospect, I've realized a lot of what I started to do was lean into intellectual endeavors, which by itself is not a bad thing, right? If that's something that people seem to value in me, well, great. I will lean into that. I can apply my brain to things that matter to me, and ideally in the future, things that matter to the world. However, there's a consequence, or at least there was a consequence for me. And it came at the expense of kind of my emotional and social development. So I wasn't as good at relationships, and my emotional world was harder for me to access, for better or worse. I could contain a lot of things, the better, but the worst was like not tending to things as actively as I could have been. So I went through school and found my way towards the sciences, really enjoyed biology in particular, gravitated towards molecular biology and possibly going to college for that. Particular interest in HIV, a very fascinating virus of how it works, and wanting to study ways to inhibit the development of AIDS, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, nowadays, medications that actually inhibit that. So there are other, I'll say, nerds like me who've been very successful, and kudos to them. So I did go to undergraduate for it, but then I hit what I call the calculus wall. And I'm one of those, I grew up, I don't know about y'all, but like if I wasn't good at it, I got to quit it. Like, if I'm not naturally good at it, then I must not be good at it at all, which is a sad mentality, but it took me away from molecular biology, and I was left with like, okay, now what am I going to do? I'm here in college. I'm supposed to be finding my profession. What am I going to do? And to this day, I do not remember what precisely got me into psychology. I do not remember. Maybe I had this sort of epiphany or accidental realization that me being depressed and anxious and living in a lab all day was not a good idea. I don't really know. But for whatever reason, I found my way to psychology. But even within psychology, it's not like I found a home right away. It really took a while getting into my profession before I'm like, okay, I like this. But it leads me to my second point is even while I was finding a home, my approach to psychology was different than it is today. So as I stand today, I am what's called, well, what I term a relational psychodynamic provider. And this permeates everything that I do. So anything that you encounter me in that's going to be informed through this approach, we call it like a theoretical orientation of the providers. Say if you're not in the field, people that you'll be encountering typically have orientations, and so that's mine. Now, the way I was originally was still more in this intellectual endeavor. And I have no beef with cognitive behavioral folks. Cognitive behavioral therapy is really a dominant approach, a dominant theoretical orientation in the field, and it has been for several decades. I have no beef with them. The problem was that approach, that orientation, colluded with that defense, that highly intellectual, as a way I can logic my way out of everything. If I can just find the right answers in my life, I will be safe, which is not really true. And I'm not saying CBT believes this. I think just CBT allowed me to harbor that. My shift came from big personal changes in my life, a big disruption that I had to rectify with myself and say, like, oh gosh, like, how did I get to this point? So I'm not being too vague, but I won't go into too much detail, like a divorce. I had to sit there and go, how did I did not plan for this. I did not want this. How did I allow something to get to this point? This guy who's getting into psychology and supposedly knows things, like, how did I allow that to happen? And that's how I came to the relational approach, because it basically said, like, look, this whole logic thing is not bad, but you have been neglecting this other thing that I mentioned earlier, emotions and especially relationships. So how has that changed me? How are you going to encounter me in this content? Well, I'll try to distill it and just kind of give you the nuggets real quick. One is that one of the central tenets is everything that we are is dependent upon the relationships we have. Now, those relationships vary. We can talk about, more traditionally, I think people think relationships with people. But it can also be relationship with systems that are conglomerates or groups of people. So I'm sure you can think of in your life some sort of relationship. It could be a parent, it could be a peer, it could be a sibling, whatever it might be. And they've shaped this in a way because how the interplay works is, like, I have my own sense of what I would like to be, my own needs and wishes and ways that I would like to be seen. But I don't get to determine how that actually translates. And so we are dependent on other people to come to us and reflect to us what they see in us. Now, it's not like one person gets to define us. What happens is many people over time get the permission and the privilege to start to define and refine who we are. And so when we're growing up, it's our parents and our peers and our siblings, but over time, teachers and other folks, et cetera, romantic partnerships. And we start to notice trends of, like, this person seems to really respond when I use humor. Or this person really seems to value that I think critically and I challenge things. Or this person really seems to respond to how helpful I am. And we're constantly noticing what is valued in us and then having to make personal decisions about what am I leaning into or what am I moving away from. And so this interplay is going on constantly. I don't care if you're talking in, like, a friendship, relationships at work, or why you're the leader that you are. This is all influenced by relationships. And never mind, again, I just said, not just individuals, but systems. How does the system respond to me? What do they value? What do they seem to deride or ignore or suppress? And what do I do with that? And so it's such a really important piece to understand ourselves relationally. And it's such a privilege, I think, to let people into each other's world. So, like, you letting me into your world by listening to this content is massively important and incredibly appreciated. It's a massive privilege because I understand that regardless of the outcome, you're allowing me to shape you in some sort of way. Much like when I that sounds one-sided, but when I encounter and I behold other people, I am making a choice to take them in and say, like, I'm going to play with their experiences and see how it shapes me. And it's such a beautiful dance that we do, but sadly, it's a dance we don't always do very well. And so the relational psychodynamic approach talks a lot about how do we encounter each other authentically and really get to know one another. And that leads to point 2, which is power differentials. So there's all this, how do we change relationships forward? And then how do we get better at it, to me, is a lot about power dynamics, vulnerability, trust, and those sorts of dynamics. Like, we have to understand that there's power dynamics in the world. It doesn't matter what your background is. You can, play musical chairs and shift who's in power. Those power dynamics are going to play out no matter what. And the challenge for us as human beings is to increase laterality, to decrease those power differentials so that we can more effectively connect with one another and learn from one another and really behold what other people offer us and behold their situations so that we can make better decisions with the power and privilege that we have. But you have to be willing to name that. You have to be willing to approach that. But one of the really key points is understanding that the journey towards equity and the journey towards equality and that laterality is endless, because you cannot eliminate those power differentials completely. That's kind of the sort of tragic reality of life, is we're trying the best we can to encounter and grow from one another, understanding that power dynamics and disappointments and those sorts of things are still going to be inevitable, but we can navigate them more fruitfully. So all this to say, you might be like, oh gosh, that was a lot, is that hopefully the vibe you get from me is very much relationship perspective forward. I'm really trying to hold multiple perspectives and really help people understand themselves better, but also help understand why and how systems operate the way that they operate, because that's the sort of overlap there, is us as individuals meeting with society and people around us. And it's a really complicated exchange, but something I'm very passionate about trying to break apart and make more digestible. Number two, the hope is, kind of in link with the whole power dynamic thing, is I hope that the space is well, it is, but I think it inspires curiosity. One of my favorite words, one of the things I try to offer as many people as I can, is it inspires curiosity. The way that I define curiosity is it's the ability to engage in wonder without the necessity for action. And the reason why I define that is I think we just gotten into this world that it's just so preoccupied with action. It's so preoccupied with, like, there's a problem, there's something in front of me, I need to do something with it right away. And I think that does us a disservice when we get so preoccupied with doing, because it stops us from stopping. It stops us from stopping. Stops us from slowing down and thinking and just considering something without this necessity to translate it or transmute it into something right away. We can get there, but you don't have to be there right away. And so if you're encountering my videos and go, okay, this guy's thinking dynamically, he's thinking systemically, he seems to really want to understand how people work, and he's not pushing me anywhere. He just wants me to consider something or get my brain turning. And I'm willing to let my brain turn a little bit, even for 5 minutes, I don't care. Then that is a massive success in my book. I mean, that is getting somebody towards the path of affecting change in their life. So there's no notion here of like, I need to change your world. But the fact that you let me into it and that I can share anything with you that you might consider, again, is a massive success for me. And number two, really a huge privilege for me too. For anybody to open up their time and their space and their brain or their heart to me is truly an honor. So all this to say, that's kind of the gist of me. I hope it's the vibe I give off. I mean, I just said, like, I don't get to determine the vibe. I don't get to determine how people will experience this content, but that is the hope, at least. That is the intent. Now, the structure plays into this. So there's lots of twos in this video. It's like, I feel like I'm distilling everything into twos. I don't know what that's about. Anyway, so two notes on format, in case it's helpful. One, you might notice that I'm ad-libbing these things. I'm not stitching this stuff together. Now, I want to be very crystal clear. Not every one of these is going to be my first take. I do not want to inadvertently and ironically, as I get to my point, be conveying a sense of perfection, because it's not the case. Sometimes I'll listen back to these, I'm like, that was like super disorganized, and I get that there's power in ad-libbing, but I don't want it to be like hard to follow, super hard to follow. So I just want to be crystal clear. There are going to be reshoots, but the ad-libbing nature is like, there's nothing around me right now. There's no script. It's just things that I think about, and I'll listen maybe if I'm doing a reshoot and just go, okay, I want to incorporate that. Boom, let's go. Now, why do I do this? One of the reasons why is authenticity. But that authenticity is not just about me. I think social media and content creation has a problem. And that problem is that I think, you know, especially when we talk about short form, which is point number two, I think what ends up happening is it creates this sense of perfection. There are these people, whether it's a TED talk or whatever, that just go up there and they just offer this sort of like perfectly woven together content, and it you know, going back to the relational approach, we are always comparing ourselves, whether we like it or not. I mean, to what degree varies, but if there's all this content that's just like this stitched together greatness and everything just boom, it always delivers at 100%, or you know, people are just delivering on high octane all the time, what does that do to us? Because there's an inauthenticity to that. I can't do retakes in real life. I don't get to like just pause or stitch things together to make my point. That's not how that works. So while that content is important, right? It delivers brief, bright, good information, and you don't have as much fluff or extraneous stuff. It creates an artificiality inadvertently. That like, is this person, if I was to meet them, are they on like that all the time? And the answer is probably not. Even with me, I mean, people say I have a gift for oration, but you get me in a more depressed mode or just on a not so good day, it's not going to be on top. I'm not going to be on top of that. And I've made tons of mistakes already. I know it. Grammatical mistakes, all sorts of stuff in this video. And that's okay. I think it's really important just to be like, yeah, I'll mess up. No big deal. Like if I make a joke or, I say something incorrectly, I can make a joke about it. It's not a big deal. And I hope that subtly conveys like imperfection's okay. In fact, imperfection is incredibly important because that's how we learn. We do not learn best through perfection. We learn best through tinkering and playing and being curious. So that's the ad-lib nature. For better or worse, I know it's not going to be polished. That is what it is. It leads me to number two, and that's the long form. I alluded to this earlier because I guess, I guess that there might be some people who are like, oh shit, this guy's like going, it's probably gonna be like 20 minutes just talking about his content. Like, holy cow, this guy talks way too much, which, fine. If that's the case, cool. But there's a reason for this. I promise there's a reason for this. And it aligns with kind of the point I was just making. So we are again in a short form society. I was kind of alluding to it. One, it's often very structured and not very ad lib. And then number two is that it's short form. Now, there is an art in distilling. That's a lot of what I've been doing today is trying to distill major points into something more central, but there's still, hopefully, you experience there's a lot of content around it. So that distilling process is an art form that requires a good amount of intentionality, but a lot is lost in that process. So we've got authenticity, now we've got depth. We lose a ton of depth in our content these days. And let me be very clear, I am just as guilty, right? I'm just as liable to pull up like an article or something online, just read the title, right? And read a few lines and then move on with my day, right? Like, I know there are risks to this. I understand that I am not getting everything I could be or need to be getting out of this content. And it's just, I get it. I totally get it. And it's probably would behoove us. It would be beneficial for us and content creators included to create greater depth, to create content that really plays around in the mud and lets people encounter information more richly. Now, I know that's a huge ask for a lot of people. I know it is. I know it's hard to carve out the time to watch 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And I'm sure I might do some that are 45 for the more complex things. Or if I interview people, those are going to be longer as well. And so I deeply appreciate that it's a huge ask for folks to be engaging in long form content. But I hope you can appreciate the rationale that while the short form stuff is good for quick and easy, it's also really important to do deep dives, particularly in content that matters and content that is like abstract. If we make this world, especially the world of psychology, overly concrete or transactional, we are doing ourselves a massive disservice. There is abstraction and there's art behind who we are as human beings, and you cannot all the time distill that into these quick and easy things that you can just like gobble up and move on with your life. we can kind of hold on to those ideas, but they don't really get incorporated. We don't really dig our roots into them unless we really dig deeper. I think there's no coincidence that when I work with people, it's not like I deliver 3 good messages and they're better. Like, that's not how that works. They have to encounter and play with the same and similar content over and over again before they really get it. And longer form content, I think, helps with that. It aids with that. It at least catalyzes and pushes that forward. That, again, at least is my hope. So that's a little bit about me. Hopefully it gives you a kind of a vibe or a feel for what you might be experiencing in these videos and audio or content that I'm putting out there. And number 2, why I've chosen the structure that I've chosen. So as I was saying earlier, I really appreciate anybody's time and consideration and any curiosity they put into my content and time that they put into my content. And again, hopefully it gives you a good frame. I'm going to be ending most of my videos with this because I think it's a great note to end on. And so I'll end this one just as well. And that I will say, stay curious. Thanks so much for watching.